Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty on Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
Okay, here we are. Welcome everybody to another version, another episode, another installment of Licking Non-Vanilla. I'm Ralph Greco Jr. here on the East Coast of wherever I live, and over there across the aisle from me is
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian, from the wild and woolly wasteland, or I should say wooded wasteland of Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah. I heard I was in Portland once, the only time I've ever been in Portland, for a play of mine. So, and somebody told me that Portland was the strip club capital of the world, of the nation. It's an interesting distinction, you know?
I like that. I haven't been up there quite yet. I've only moved here about 6 or 7 months ago. So,
Right.
I haven't quite explored that yet. But, I do know it has this wild side. And
Right.
Unfortunately, Eugene does not. But still, I can't complain. I really love it here.
Right. Yeah, you came from a very wild place, which was this Bay Area.
Exactly.
That must have been crazy back in the day, Chris, huh?
Oh, absolutely. It was fun. I mean, that's like I was really lucky that when I was, I came to the Bay Area in '88, and I was married shortly thereafter. I think I came a couple of years earlier than that. But anyway, back then it's like, the scene, the BDSM scene was just really kind of getting going. So, my wife at the time, we joined every organization on the planet. There was all kinds of shops. There was a party every weekend.
Yeah.
It was definitely, a really kind of a lucky time to be there. And that was, of course, when people could afford to live in the city, but now you can't. So there you go. But yeah, for a while there, it was quite fun.
So just tell people, because how we define BDSM, or how anybody does, or how do you?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, because it's like, it's one of those kind of terms. It's like, it's funny because when I was first in the scene, which is the other term for this world, it was called SM. But after a certain amount of time, like a lot of things, it's evolved, and now it becomes BDSM, which basically stands for bondage. Bondage, discipline, slave master, or sadomasochism, which is basically any kind of. Well, I mean, it really kind of covers a whole bunch of stuff.
Power exchange, right?
Power exchange.
Yeah.
But it also includes a lot of fetishes. It also includes a lot of role play. Some people put age play in there somewhere. I mean, it's just like, it really is a big kind of umbrella term for everything that's basically, not vanilla sex. So.
Yeah, I was going to talk about one thing with you, but I think we're going in a different direction, which is perfectly fine. I was thinking maybe we could talk about getting how one acquires the keys to the kinkdom, as we said.
Sure.
How these days are different than they used to be, and what people should be looking out for, and how we define all this. What do you, first and foremost, because you were just talking a little bit about it, what are the big differences you feel between now and then?
Oh boy, I don't want to date myself, but back then, of course, it's pre-internet, and
right.
Back then it was really very much kind of you went to, like, for instance, an open group. In other words, a group that advertises and anybody can attend. And one of the best ones was the Society of Janus, which has been around now for, I think, like 50 years or something like that. It's one of the oldest kink organizations out there. And when I was a part of it, it was only like 25 years ago. I'm 25 years old or so. And what's great about it, it's a really kind of good entry point, because, they have like orientations where if you first, join up, you can sort of like get the lowdown on what the organization is and what kink is about. And from there, you can go to like parties, and you can go to classes, and you get a newsletter, which I was actually editor of for like a year and a half. But it's a good entry point, because after a point, people start to recognize you. And once they know you as a person and know you're trustworthy and, are not like an arrogant twit or
Right.
dangerous, the doors start to open up and you start to get invited to the parties that aren't advertised or the groups that aren't, all that public.
Hmm.
But now, of course, with the internet, that's completely changed. I mean, there's
Right.
still some groups that don't advertise and you have to know someone to get involved with, but now it's pretty much all done online as far as like, making contacts and such, which is, not good or bad. It's just, change. I do think that, there was a certain benefit to having to like, be a real person in the real world, but at the same time, it's like, it's not quite so isolating. So, if you're living in Frostbite Falls, Minnesota, and there's no other
Yeah.
Kinksters in town, you can still like, connect with people and sort of share stories and get advice and such, which you couldn't do before.
I think I remember back somewhere in the 80s finding a club in the city that was, typically you paid a lot of money to get in the door for the membership,
Hmm.
and it was a club that some things were going on at. But and of course New York City was replete with Hellfire Club and a lot of places like that and societies like you're talking about. But I didn't know about the scene so much back in the day. But these days, you're right. It seems to have exploded with Collar Me and FetLife and Facebook. There's even, I guess you could find it on Facebook if you wanted to. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and like you said, it's good because people can connect that can't usually connect. And then
Exactly.
there's probably a bad side to that as well, like as in everything. But but you and I, because we've gone to some of the conventions and taught there, we've always kind of approached it with we say this over and over how wonderful we are, but we're very approachable and we like to talk to people and hang out and get to know people just generally. So it's easy for us to socialize in any kind of group generally. But I don't think everybody has such an ease, a way to discuss things with people and aren't not everybody so is comfortable. So
Absolutely.
if that's the case and you're a little shy with your particular niche that you're into, and so say you sign up to go to a club or a convention, how do you think you should approach that? Like, I mean, it's different for you and I because we don't think that way. But I'm saying for somebody who's a novice or somebody who's just a little skittish in that way, not so social, how do you think they best should make an approach?
Well, I think they're the best way. I mean, it's even though the internet is fantastic and so forth, and really, all kinds of special kinds of cool, and I definitely live on it more than I probably should.
Hmm.
Nothing really beats like getting out there and actually meeting people. Now, if you're living in somewhere like I said before, Frostbite Falls, Minnesota, you
Yeah.
might be, in trouble. But by and large, that they have like, the kink scene is usually pretty good about like having representation all over the place. So,
Yeah.
do a little research, and there's usually like an organization or there's like what's called a munch. And munches are really quite cool, and they're a really good introduction. It's basically a whole bunch of kinksters get together at something like a chain restaurant or something similar,
Hmm.
and just basically talk and just basically kind of meet each other.
Right.
The one thing I don't advise is don't like come to a munch like wearing your kink on your sleeve. So in other
Right.
words, if
Right.
you're a dom, don't treat everybody like a sub. If you're a sub, basically leave your roles at the door. Because that
Right.
way people know who you are. They start to really recognize you, and that's how you make connections. And making the connections is really key because that's when the doors start to open. You can of course also like go to like big events. Like we've gone to quite a number of them. Sin in the City, which is in Vegas.
Hmm.
One of our favorites is Beat Me in St. Louis, which is obviously in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Though I do think it's like having a little bit of a socialization before even going to one of those helps.
I agree. I
Because
totally agree.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think, and those situations that we've been in, whether it be a get together for some dinner at a bar where the back room of a bar where you just hang out and have dinner,
hmm
or going to a club or something, it's the same rules apply in any kind of social situation. And I think that's
Absolutely.
what people forget, and that people that are on the outside of this often forget. It's kind of like that. Unfortunately, that old stigma with, they would uh, uh, label homosexuals as child molesters. That was the
Hmm.
first, you'd go to that immediately. Which was never fair and never reasoned. But it was because we don't understand that group. We have to say those people do that.
Hmm.
And the people we've met and are certainly just normal social people. You know, and
Exactly.
and they
And that's the
respond
thing.
to
It's like,
this. Yeah.
I mean, no matter what you do, I mean, the people are the same, the world around. I mean, it's
Right.
like, I mean, I used to, laugh in that, because sometimes people make suppositions, like you said before, about like, oh, if you're kinky, you must be that. But it's like, you go to a kink club and you'll find the same dynamics, or I should say, a kink organization rather
Yeah.
than a club. But if you go to a kink group and you hang out with kink people, you realize they're just like everybody. I mean, their interests might be, what they're interested in, but at the same time, it's like they still, get up every morning, put their pants on the same way, or skirts, or whatever your gender clothing preference is. But it's
Hmm.
like, that's it's like the commonality is more, more delightful, I think, because you might be hanging out with someone who likes to get suspended from the ceiling by their nipples, and somebody else who likes to, wear frilly dresses and get
Hmm.
flogged, but they're all still basically human beings. So, the best way of getting a good experience is by being a good human being. I mean,
Yeah,
that's really it.
basically. And we could say that across the board for any relationship you're trying to start. A business
Exactly.
relationship, with your brother or your sister, or with a partner that
Hmm.
you may have some fun with. Doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I think, well, we've experienced nothing but positive times when we've gone to any kind of convention. I think
Hmm.
we could both say that wholeheartedly. But do you? Because I mean, I was wondering about this too. Do you find conventions increasing in frequency, or decreasing in frequency?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, I probably could research it, but on the offhand, I think it seems to be increasing.
Which is
I'm trying
interesting
to,
because of it's did not to cut you off, but you always say this all the
oh,
time to me. Science fiction conventions are kind of dwindling in a way,
mm-hmm,
because you got
mm-hmm,
the big ones, you got Comic-Con and stuff. But back in the day when
mm-hmm.
we were kids, man, there were science fiction conventions everywhere.
Oh, all the time, all the time.
But it seems like they're going the other way. Like they're kind of
Mm-hmm,
becoming a dinosaur because of technology. People don't need the
mm-hmm.
conventions as much.
Exactly,
But I wonder,
exactly.
but I guess because Kinksters are hands-on, so to speak, they do need them
Mm-hmm.
more. Maybe.
I completely agree. I think
Yeah.
you hit it on the nail on the head. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
No, I
you're right.
interrupted you.
It's like, it's like one of the things about like science fiction conventions was you went there because that's the only place you could do things like buy books or
Right.
see celebrities or watch movies, and of course
Right.
all of that, except for this meeting celebrities, you can do online.
Yeah.
But with kink, one of the big allures is playing with each other, and you can't do that virtually.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually kind of increased. I'm trying to remember, when I was first in the scene, how many events there were, and there weren't that many.
Hmm.
There really weren't. Of course, I was in San Francisco, which, a lot of times it's like cities like San Francisco don't have a lot of big events because there's already a kink presence. So,
Right.
like in
Right.
San Francisco, there's like a public play space called the Citadel. There's also the coffee house called Wicked Grounds,
Hmm.
and there's a bunch of private spaces. So you don't need an event. But other places like, St. Louis, I mean, an event is where you go to play because that's the only place you can, find other kinksters, as well as where the equipment is located.
Right. And we should also say that the Citadel and Wicked Grounds have hosted both M. Christian and Ralph Greco Jr.
That's true.
On many occasions. Um, yeah, it's interesting too because yeah, we talk about this all the time. Whether you specifically write about it at Future of Sex, or we talk about it in general as writers of erotica, how and we're also science fiction guys, so how
Hmm.
technology is affecting our sex lives,
Oh,
more or less.
tremendously
And
so. Absolutely. Oh God, yes.
but it seems not to be impinging on the kink scene. And if anything, it maybe is expanding the kink scene because it's
Hmm.
allowing for more communication and people.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting because I mean, this is actually how I was going to start the show today. I was gonna ambush you with a question about something that I read recently, but it's a technology question, and about what we can do with technology, and if it's a good thing or bad. In this one instance, I'm going to tell you about, but I think we certainly can agree it seems to be helping any kind of outlying community that maybe is not in the mainstream. Would you say that's true?
Oh, absolutely. It's a wonderful way of people to connect for the first time because before the internet, I mean, the only way you could communicate with someone was by phone, letter, newsletter, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So again, if you're out in the willies where, you think you're the only person on the planet who's into something, it was miserable because
Right.
one, you thought you were a freak, and two, you were lonely, and it was really very debilitating. Now it's like you just simply type in whatever your fetish or particular interest is, or whatever your orientation is, or anything for that matter. And instantly you find out not only are you not alone, but there's an entire community out there who think or feel and desire the same exact way you do.
Right.
So I
Right.
think it's absolutely wonderful that way. And it's definitely wonderful for BDSM. I think the only drawback for BDSM is that a lot of education really kind of needs to be sort of in your face, hands on. It's too easy to write an article, and I'm not using us as an example because we do our research and trying to be as accurate as possible, but it's pretty easy to simply to consider yourself an expert and then post something when the information is either wrong or dangerous. But when you're actually in present doing something, there's that kind of like checks and balances thing that goes on there. But at the same time, I don't think it's a huge problem.
Right. Right.
I do think it's something that people need to be aware of. So, if you're reading something online, always take it with a grain of salt, no matter what it's about, until you do your research.
Yeah, I think. Well, again, it's like anything else. Sometimes we get so much information and have access to so much information that we take that to be experience, and it isn't. It isn't. And when we're talking about the things we're talking about and the things we teach about, we always talk about experience, being the leader.
Exactly.
Take
exactly.
a class or
Because
whatever.
like you can read all you want about something like using a flogger, but the old maxim again of a picture's worth 1,000 words. I mean, a 20-minute lecture about how to flog and all the safety concerns and all the details gives you much more information than a half of a book,
Right.
because just seeing it, you can see exactly what's going on. So, even though it's like we both written our share of articles, I always kind of tell people it's like, try and get out there as much as possible, especially for something like BDSM, because it is risky. There are some things that really can hurt you if you're not careful.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've heard some great stories, and we've heard some bad stories, the things that have happened, And yeah, Chris and I have erred on the side of always caution in our lives and what we teach. Just to let you know, you're listening to the Licking Non-Vanilla with Ralph Greco Jr. Forgot my name for a second. And over there is M. Christian. And we're on the Red Circle Network, podcast network. So if that's where you're finding us, and we hope that you sign up and you sign in and check us out all over. Now, Chris, the thing I want to talk to you about, what I want to start the show with, is a technology question. And it dovetails nicely into not only what we're just talking about, but also our love of geekdom and science fiction. So recently, on the Disney Plus platform, they released the movie Splash. Could they be releasing?
Oh, I heard about this. Yes,
did you
go
hear
ahead
about this?
though. Yes.
Yeah. So they've been releasing a ton of stuff. And Disney owns whoever they own. I don't know if it's Universal or whoever they own, and they have a lot of movies they can release. So they released Splash. But what happened was there's a scene in Splash where Tom Hanks' character is looking at Daryl Hannah's character, who is the mermaid in the movie Splash, as she goes back into the water. And there's a real quick scene of him looking at her, and she's walking into the water, and she's from behind, and she's naked. She's a mermaid, so not going to be wearing clothes. And for that brief moment, you see her bare booty. And Disney, in their infinite wisdom, covered it up with CGI. They kind of extended her hair down her back, I didn't see the shot, but everybody's saying it looks less like hair down her back and more like a matted piece of fur over her ass. So, first of all, I don't even know if that's Daryl Hannah's butt. It could be a stand-in, but and then that started this whole question about what Disney's doing to these movies, and the roles and the roll calls in the beginning, letting you know about the warnings, and then the digital manipulation. And we've seen this with Lucas. George Lucas did this with the original 3 Star Wars movies. So it's a long question here, Chris. But and when it comes to censorship, we're very cautious. Where our hackles go up immediately. But so, and here's perfect example of maybe technology not being used in the best way it can be used. So what's your take on all that?
It's really odd. I mean, it's like, for one thing, it's like censorship is a government, so they're a corporation. They can do what they want, and if they own the film, they can do whatever they want as well. So it's their property. And it always makes me uncomfortable, mainly because it's kind of hypocritical. Because there's movies even on the Disney Channel that are very violent,
right?
But dare you show a bare butt and the world comes to an end,
right? Exactly.
It's just like, give me a break. I mean, that's a long time hypocrisy, though. This has been around forever, where you cut someone's head off, it gets an R rating. If you show someone giving head, it gets an X.
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
it's just that a hypocrisy of that is annoying. But at the same time, I can understand why they did it, because again, it's a family channel.
Yes.
And there's even more egregious versions of this. There was a conservative version of something like Netflix that was actually censoring movies, and then not censoring. They were editing movies, to remove like things they consider to be like bad. That's different. I also know, like, for instance, that Ted Turner way back when was colorizing black and white movies until he was forced to stop because all the filmmakers were giving him a very, I think, much deserved hard time.
Yeah.
So again, it's like it's a very fuzzy question, because it depends on why they're doing it, if they have the right to do it. In the case of Disney, I think it's actually, they're perfectly fine doing it. I mean, I think it's kind of a silly little thing to do, but it's one of the things where it's like, it is their property and their channel.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Can't argue that.
But I do think it's like, once again, our culture has such a problem with sex and nudity anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the Puritan ethic, something that we fight against and about all the time.
It's so horrible. I mean, it's like, especially on social media, it's like, it's like you one wrong move on any whatever platform you are, and suddenly you're blocked out, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's a private company. I mean, it's like, you can scream censorship, but it's, once again, it's a company and not the government. So you don't have a leg to stand on. So if Twitter decides that your, pictures are obscene, if Instagram decides it, if Facebook decides it, then guess what? You don't have a choice. You can't take it and go somewhere else.
Well, you and I have both run up against some of this with Amazon. Because if a book, because Chris and I write, a lot of the erotica we write crosses genres or crosses niche, so it's not just one kind. So there's a lot of stuff that we get into in our writing, and sometimes it can be mistaken, or I don't know. I still don't understand the parameters here, but the wrong word is used, or you allude to something, and you're excised, or the work just gets taken off, and it happens all the time on Amazon, or has happened.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Amazon's a really good example of that, because I mean, I don't want to get too much of the details, because I'm not too sure how much I can actually share, but I know a while ago, it's like, what happened was they opened the platform. So they started to push the idea that, hey, you can self-publish on Amazon.
Yeah.
And they really were pushing that. And then suddenly, guess what? A whole bunch of people were publishing really explicit stuff. And what does Amazon do? It completely freaks out. And instead of like trying to change the rules, they start banning like erotica left and right.
Yeah.
To the point where a lot of publishers that we work with had to go through with a mad scramble and start changing descriptions and titles of books, because they were just bringing the ban hammer down on anybody.
Right.
And it was just ridiculous. And it's sort of eased up now, but for a while there it was scary, because Amazon really is the only game in town when you're selling books. So if they kick you off, then that's about it. I mean, there's no real, I mean, you can go to other places, but frankly, you're not going to get any money. So it was pretty scary for a while there, and especially since they wouldn't say why they're banning something. They would just say your book has been rejected.
Right.
So,
I
and it's
seem
scary enough when you're an individual, but when you're a publisher, they could ban your entire catalog, so it was pretty scary.
yeah, it was an arbitrary. It seemed to be an arbitrary cut
hmm
across the board, and we tried to figure it out. I know you working for some people at the time and still are. And so I would hear it from you, and you guys were trying to figure out the parameters and what
hmm
exactly was why it was happening in certain titles and not in others. And
hmm
then if you tend to write a certain kind of stuff, certain buzzwords seem to get to them, even in the titles. Remember?
hmm
And
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
because I had a book and I know you had some stuff. I had a series that was we were wondering about because of just the way it was in the title.
hmm
Even though it was
hmm
was a obvious fantasy, obvious
hmm
an erotica fantasy, but it didn't matter. And
hmm
so when it comes to this ability of a private company to either change a movie or change or not
hmm
publish books, like you said, first of all, you can't fight it because it's a private company.
hmm
But it's hard to know where the goalposts are moving to.
Exactly. That's what's scary about it. I mean, it's like half the time they don't tell you. I
Mhm.
mean, they'll say something like, "Oh, by what? Guess what? Your thing's been banned." I mean, I've lost accounts on Twitter and Tumblr, and still are unsure about why it was taken down. And
Mhm.
half the time it's like even when they do, they don't listen to you. So you can argue your case, but if they decide to, and it's completely arbitrary because I'd swear half the time these are just like one employee happens to look, at these social media companies, look at your account, and they decide that it's inappropriate, as opposed
Mhm.
to like, being able to like, argue with them or something similar.
Right.
So it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
And the weirdest things will get knocked down. The weirdest things won't. I mean, sometimes it's like back when I was a publisher, which I still do a little bit, but not much. It would became this kind of like rolling the dice. You upload a book and you wait for the message that says your book has been accepted or not, and there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Mhm.
So it's very frustrating and very scary too, because if you've built up your Twitter feed to a point where it's doing really good for you, and bang, suddenly you've been kicked out. It's just there's nothing you can do.
It's a really strange thing, and it adds to what Chris and I talk about all the time. And it's not, oh, woe is me, but it's the stigmatizing of an erotic writer.
hmm
When you write stuff that's either or edgy, you can write very violent horror too.
hmm
And I think you run into this. It's hard enough to write the stuff and get it published in certain places, but what makes it even harder is you have this kind of, I don't want to say a prejudice, but a certain kind of feeling towards it to begin with, and it's
hmm
almost kind of like we're watching out for you guys specifically.
Oh yeah,
You know?
oh yeah. In fact, I can tell you that's exactly what happens, because if you're submitting a book to Amazon, to anywhere, I mean, iBooks, Barnes and Noble, whenever you put a book up, there's a little button that appears, and it says something like, it all depends on the platform because they're all different,
Mhm.
but it usually says something like includes explicit material or
Yes.
something like that, or what's the audience, and it says adult only.
Right.
That automatically changes the goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're putting up a book that is just like, you don't hit that button, they don't look at it very much. But
Right.
the instant you hit that explicit button, they look at it like much more than they
They're
would
going to come
normally.
on. They're going to come at you hard. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
once again, it's totally capricious. I mean, it's like, the rules don't make any sense. I mean, just look what happened with Tumblr, about a year or so ago, where,
Oh, absolutely.
that was a disaster, and it still is, because Tumblr was pretty much the wild and woolly west of social media, and it had its problems. But what happened was it got bought, and they're trying to make it attractive to sell off or something like this, and they suddenly realized, oh my God, there's porn on Tumblr.
Right.
So they enacted this stupid censorship thing that made no sense. Like, no forward-facing nipples was one of them. It's just
Mhm.
like, seriously, it's like forward-facing female nipples, which is just like, give me a break. So sidewise is fine. Okay, what about illustrations? What about classical
Yeah.
artwork?
Right.
It's like, what about bumps and sweaters? I mean, just like, it was totally ridiculous. And they're taking down like, hundreds of thousands of posts and flagging
a lot.
accounts. And it was just, it was awful. I mean, it was just like a nightmare, and worse because they didn't know what the frick they were doing.
Yeah, and it
You
happened
know.
like Chris said. It happened within like days.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
edict came down and boom, stuff was
Mm-hmm.
just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what happened. Is Tumblr still around?
It's still there. I'm still there.
Okay.
You know, though my account is like, you know, like an eighth of what it was beforehand.
Yeah.
So, you know, but most people have kind of deserted it, you know. But, you know, there's not many places you can go. I mean, there's some, you know, when you're talking about social media stuff, I mean, certain ones like, you know, Twitter, I don't want to justify Twitter because they're pretty bad as well, but really all of them are problematic because
Yeah.
they all have these weird, you know, capricious rules about things. And, you know, and one thing will be fine and another thing suddenly will get you banned and you have no control over it. And some people have tried to start up alternatives, but frankly, it's like, you know, when you have like, you know, a fraction of the followers, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
some people I know have gone over to like Pornhub or, you know, various other places for, you know, doing this kind of stuff. But, you know, it's kind of like, you know, the world we live in. You got to kind of roll the dice every time you
Yeah.
post something.
It's true. It's true. You don't know. But also when it comes to the digital, because it's so easy to change things, right? Download things, look at things, post. You also get those instances, and this will show once again Chris and mine geekdom, where the creator themselves changes the piece, the movie, the music afterwards, because now they have the ability to. It happens in music all the time, because you can go in and mess with tracks and either make them into something totally different, have fun with them, or take the original and boost one instrument over another. It's kind of what they call remastering, remixing, and making it. Sometimes it does make the sound quality better, sometimes not. It's arguable, but there is the famous case of George Lucas going back.
I was just going to say.
And effing with Star Wars, which was to all of us pretty much sacrilege.
And how many times did he do it? He did it like 4 or 5 times. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And I don't know what the original movies are. If they're, what Chris and I are talking about, basically, I think it was, he may have messed with 3 of the beginning ones, but I know he messed with the first Star Wars movie that came out.
Yep.
That's not the first Star Wars movie in the chronological order, but it is the first one that came out. And he went in and he made some egregious changes. I mean, and because he could. He has first of all, they're his. He owns the rights, although he doesn't owe them anymore. But Disney does. Speaking of Disney, but he went in and he made some changes. And I got it. I saw the changes. Did you see it? Did you see the changes?
I think I did. I mean, I know there's a couple that were really spectacular bad. There was like the Death Star blew up. They added some CGI to it. There was like, you know, there's a whole bunch of other ones. The famous one, of course, is Greedo shooting, you know, shooting first, which was just like, I mean, it's like, seriously? I mean, it's like, it was just ridiculous because, you know, I saw we talked before in one of our other shows. It's like I saw Star Wars when it first came out, and I love that scene because it shows like, you know, Han's a badass, and it's also like removes that classic trope of like the hero having to be perfectly hero inside. You know, Han just shoots him, and it's
Chris,
like
describe what you're talking about, because people know Star Wars, but describe that scene. Yeah, that's true.
It's early in the film, and you know, got Han Solo, who's the badass, played by Harrison Ford. And, you know, our heroes have come into the bar and they're looking for a starship pilot. And here's Han. And this character starts accosting him and threatens him. And Han has his gun under the table and shoots this guy named Greedo. And I don't think it caused any kind of fuss because it was just, you know, a scene in the movie. Yeah. But for some weird reason, Lucas went back in and digitally edited the original film so it looks like Greedo shot and then Han was defending himself.
Right.
Which is just like, seriously, why would you change something like this? It's just like, I mean, why would you change it anyway? I mean, why would you change the film to begin with?
It undercuts the badassness of Han, too, like you said.
Exactly.
Yeah, this bad things in that. Yeah, he did some really bad things in that.
Oh, and you know, so he keeps doing that too. I mean,
Oh, I
he
know.
changed a whole bunch of things, and I mean, even the whole idea now that Star Wars is no longer called Star Wars; it's called the Star Wars: A New Hope, and
Yeah,
it's not considered the first movie, but like the fourth or something like that. I
right,
can't keep it straight.
right.
So it's just like, oh, come on, give me a break, guys.
Yeah, I just because for me, I mean, I do this all the time for vintage rock. I'm getting remastered classic albums to listen to and review,
Mm-hmm.
and they're, I mean, in the remaster versions, what usually happens is they just make everything that much more defined and clearer. You know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there was a keyboard part that was way down in the mix, it comes forward in the mix. Well, that's remixing. But anyway, generally it just makes it more of a pristine recording and clearer, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking. But there is remixing that goes on when either the producer or some fan who happens to be a producer or engineer, or the guys themselves in the band go in and they remix the album. So you're
Mm-hmm.
getting it totally different than when you first heard it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and a mix of an album is an art form all its own. It's like
Mm-hmm.
taking scenes in a movie and moving them around, and so it's a different beast altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you can do it, and we say this all the time, you and I. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should. But you know, I guess like we said, if the creator wants to change it, he certainly can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I like the thing to stand alone what it was, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
You
I
know,
always
and
really respect what Warner Brothers did. I think it was Warner Brothers. Please, if someone please, you know, write us and tell me if I
yeah,
got this wrong. I think it was Warner Brothers because you mentioned that Disney has now like released a lot of their films that were questionable,
yeah,
you know, because of when they were produced.
yeah.
And if I remember correctly, Warner Brothers actually did the same thing, but they actually had a really very, I think, really well done statement at the start of them saying this is inappropriate then, it's inappropriate now, but changing, you know, or editing, you know, what was done, it basically whitewashes, you know, the issue. So
Well,
in
yeah,
other
you can't
words,
change
you
history.
know, exactly. And I like that the fact that they're not celebrating, but they're saying it's like we're not going to remove this because it would be like pretending this didn't exist. And I thought that was very responsible. I thought it was very, very, very well done because, you know, and Disney, unfortunately, you know, it's like I mean, the Hannah's butt thing. I mean, it's kind of weird because I mean, it is like more of an adult content. So I'm really wondering if they've done the same thing for a lot of the older films. I know certain films like Song of the South will never be seen again. They put that in the archive
Yeah,
forever. But other ones still have problems, and
which
I'm surprised what they still allow out, frankly.
yeah, it's weird too because I think all that stuff should be seen and heard within the
Mm-hmm.
context of what it is. And that's how we
Mm-hmm.
learn of, the good and bad of history, of course, right? We
Mm-hmm.
we understand that when you see Song of the South, some of those things in that movie seem offensive in
Mm-hmm.
in our eyes. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't offensive then in some ways, in some ways they were. But you don't learn unless unless you read Huckleberry Finn,
Mm-hmm.
which famously has words in it that get it banned all the time. But you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to go in and change Huckleberry Finn or Tom
Mm-hmm.
Sawyer. I mean, these are
People have tried.
masterpieces. Oh, I know they have.
Exactly.
These are masterpieces. Just because,
Mm-hmm.
and Twain is relating the language of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say it was wrong because it's the language of the time. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, to go in and to change that, to alter history because it doesn't fit our modern day sensibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole host of things could be
Mm-hmm.
written about whether our modern day sensibilities are good or not anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
to judge that stuff by the color of our prism seems you could judge it fine, but don't change it because
Mm-hmm.
where we are now. I think it's powerful to see what the stuff
Mm-hmm.
was,
Exactly, and understand why it was wrong. And it's like,
Right.
like I mentioned before, it's like they're just kind of whitewashing over the fact this existed. It's better
Yeah.
to face it and realize it was bad then, it's bad now. I have to say though, it's like every once in a while I come across something that's kind of interesting, where you know an author or a work will basically kind of like update the language.
Mm.
You know, and this might be apocryphal, and I really apologize if it is because I just think it's a great example of this. And if someone's listening and knows more about this, please let me know. 'Cause I did some research, but I never could get an answer. But I remember listening to a radio show, and this is a group that does like performances of famous books,
Mhm.
including science fiction, and they did an adaptation of Hey All You Zombies by Robert Heinlein.
Mhm.
And if you've never read the story, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it does deal with sex reassignment.
Mhm.
And what I heard was they reached out to the Heinlein estate and actually got permission to alter the language in the story to make it more modern. Because a
Mhm.
lot of the terminology he was using was in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really wonderful because the story didn't change. They didn't edit the story, they just changed the language. And I thought that was really kind of cool. And I love the fact they asked permission, and
Well,
got
yeah,
it.
you
So,
better
you
goddamn
know,
ask permission.
exactly. But, I hope this is a true story because I really like the fact that, again, they just simply updated the language.
Yeah.
So they didn't use, clumsy or outdated or insulting language for, referring to like characters who were transgendered.
Yeah.
And I always really like that. So I think that's okay when you like update certain things. At the same time, it's like if you're trying to change the book itself, that's different, or the work itself. But yeah, it's always very weird and very slippery. And it's getting even more complicated now because we have deep fake technology where we can basically make anybody into anything, and we could insert Dustin Hoffman into like, Triumph of the Will if we wanted to. I
Right.
mean, it's. I mean, I'm usually pretty optimistic around technology, and I do kind of like, I have to say that I'm kind of a technophile, and I love playing with all this kind of cool stuff. But that is something that actually kind of scares me. It's the fact that it's getting easier and easier to sort of like digitally manipulate, what is reality or what happened in the past,
Oh yeah.
and having very hard way to, very difficult to, figure out what's true and what isn't.
Yeah.
And that's pretty
yeah.
creepy.
And who's on the button? If there's somebody
Mm-hmm.
on the button and they have a
Mm-hmm.
certain prejudice either way or a certain
Mm-hmm.
worldview, it can be altered to that as
Mm-hmm.
beyond what the creator, because with the person who creates the piece, they had a certain world. Let's keep to their worldview. That's fine. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't want somebody else coming in and changing my view, how
Mm-hmm.
I want to do something.
At the same time, it has the potential of being kind of cool. I really like the idea of creating like fake realities. So because we now have all this cool technology between image manipulation and like 3D printing, we
Yeah.
can create artifacts and media from a world that never existed. And I think that's really kind of cool. It's like how you see like you look up like steampunk, which is the
Mhm.
Victorian era kind of science fiction stuff, and how people are creating entire steampunk works and environments and devices, that once again never existed, but they can do that now. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole world of virtual reality and how
Mm-hmm.
that dovetails into our interactions with each other, and of course our sexual interactions with each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Where
absolutely.
we don't particularly have to go anywhere to have a good time,
Mm-hmm.
or go anywhere to lick non-vanilla, basically, and which is the
Mm-hmm.
name of the show, Licking Non-Vanilla, with Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian, the Red Circle Network. Anyway, yeah, so we see this all the time, but we write about this all the time. You more than
Mm-hmm.
I, at Future of Sex, about the how technology is taking over.
Mm-hmm.
Good and bad.
Oh, it's very cool. It's very, very cool. I have to say,
Yeah.
it's really very cool. I mean, by and large, it's like there's a couple of things that pop up every blue moon that makes me kind of go, ew, dystopia. But for
Yeah.
the most part, it's actually pretty positive. Like virtual reality is really exciting. I mean, the problem is it's expensive. I mean, you can either if you pay for like a high end, virtual reality rig, it'll cost you a couple of grand.
Mhm.
Mainly because it's not just the rig, it's the computer that has to run it. But now, like, there's the Oculus Quest, which is only like $300, $400, which is
Mhm.
ridiculously cheap. And it's actually being helped produced by Facebook, of all places.
Mhm.
And then you have also PlayStation Network has their own version, which is like $400. And if you want to go ultra cheap, but it's really not all that effective, is you can use your smartphone with like
Okay.
a plastic clamshell you strap to your face. But I mean, my dabbling with it hasn't been all that much because I can't afford it. But I'm actually quite excited the fact that for $400 you can get a pretty immersive experience. But yeah, there's like all kinds of adult sites now that are doing virtual reality, and there's tons of them. If you type in virtual reality porn, you're going to get buried in it.
Yeah.
And then you got the sex toys, that some of which we've reviewed. that are often like intelligent. In other words, they're designed to work with like Bluetooth and proprietary apps,
Yeah.
and then over the internet, so you can actually feel what's going on the screen or in your virtual reality rig. It's really quite cool.
Yeah. They sometimes those toys are more intelligent than the people using them.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, and you know, it's funny too. I don't know if we talked about it on here, but I've certainly talked about it plenty of times because I got connected with a company called Real Touch, the first people to make this kind of like apparatus that you had that you could wear in certain parts of your body, and then watch it video, a movie online, and then there was
That's very
prompts.
cool.
There was prompts in the movie that would activate the thing you were wearing.
Cool. That's great.
They developed that technology from NASA because it was called haptic technology, HAPTIC. And actually, NASA came up with it because it was how they could steer spaceships through telemetry. You know, with somebody sitting on back in Florida with a control nozzle moving the spaceship. You know, and then they just took that. This company, Real Touch, I don't even think they're in existence anymore. And they took that and just kind of expanded it and used it to their nefarious ends.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
that's exciting. That's really cool. I mean, that's the thing you're reading more and more. In fact, I just saw something in my news feed just today about a company that's working on like haptic technology for like virtual reality. I mean, for like that kind of stuff. So it's like it's getting more and more prevalent. I mean, before you know it, we're going to have things that we can actually feel in all kinds of different ways as well as see them. So it's really very exciting. And of course, if you have a disability, it makes tremendous sense because it's like you can work around that or find ways of like enjoying yourself and other ways you never could think possible. So it's really very exciting. I mean, it's very cool.
Yeah, and like anything else, you got to cheat back in certain areas. It gets too much, it gets not enough. I mean, it's like anything else, and people find their way, or sometimes this pendulum swings well on the other side, and causes some problems. But we tend to find our way through, or somebody builds a better mousetrap, and then we go to that.
And I love the fact I love the fact also. I mean, when this technology first comes out, it's usually ridiculously expensive. I mean, you know how that goes with anything. I mean, the first computers, I mean, you don't want to think about how expensive they were. Now it's like you can, basically, plop down like a couple $100 and have a nice little laptop. So the same thing with virtual reality and all this technology. I mean, I reviewed a couple of Internet of Things sex toys, and they run everything from like $100 to $200, which it's pricey, but not that bad. I mean, when you think about it. So and the quality is ridiculously
quality is unbelievable.
Good.
I mean, we've seen some stuff come across our desk that we had a review, like you were saying. The quality of the stuff is just unbelievable. I mean, talk about back in the day as opposed to now. It's like you were playing with like it's just Tinker toys back in the day. And
they're awful
stuff. Yes, it's stuff that.
Oh, there's awful. And those old sex toys were awful. I mean, they were disgusting. They broke. They were badly designed. They were just like jokes or like novelties. And now it's like you have like well-established sexologists and researchers who are designing them, and engineers that might as well be working for NASA.
Right.
Putting the guts in there. It's really quite amazing. I mean, and again, it's like there's so many of them. I mean, there used to only be a few companies. Now there's like dozens, if not hundreds.
Yeah.
So it's like, you take your pick, and that's like, you can have anything you ever wanted.
And all those companies feel free to contact advertise with Licking Non-Vanilla. We'll take you.
Advertise,
please, and we'll mention you on
Don't make
on the
us
show.
beg.
Absolutely, we can be bought. We can easily be bought.
Yes, we definitely can be bought. Yes, we're actually quite affordable.
Yes, yeah. That's the thing about Chris and I. When we whore ourselves out, we're pretty we're very affordable.
Exactly. We have installment plans available. We take credit.
Absolutely.
Trade, food stamps. It's like you name it.
We can be had for ridiculous small amount of money, or anything else you want to pay us in. We're good for whatever you want to pay us in. But as always, Chris, it's been a great almost hour with you. We always have a good time just jawing whether
And it's wonderful.
we're sitting in a diner somewhere or we're on here. We just, Chris and I can really talk a blue streak. You know, and it's funny because we talk a lot. I was thinking about this. We talk a lot. We don't see each other so often, but we talk a lot. So then when we see each other, you would think, well, you guys talk all the time. What are you going to talk about when you see each other? But like, there's a whole new level of stuff to get out. For some reason, when we see each other, it prompts us in a different way, in a different direction. You know. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works. You know. So
well, this has been always delightful, Ralphie. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope everyone is enjoying this much because we're having an absolute kick.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You know, absolutely tune in next time and send us questions because you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and hopefully on Instagram if I get the damn thing to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm leaving with a quote what we were talking about before about censorship and words and stuff. I got this quote from Lenny Bruce, who happens to be one of my personal favorites. And Lenny Bruce said, "It's the suppression of the word that gives it the power." So think about that. There's a lot to be thought of in that little statement. Chris, what can I say? We're gods among men. Yeah. But it's been fun as always, Chris. Thanks so much. And thank you all for listening. This has been Licking Non-Vanilla with Ralph Recco Jr. and
I'm Christian.
And
we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.